Well, hello again.
Hello.
Nice to be back. And today I wanted to share something that came out of an experience I had a couple of days ago that really kind of helped me understand a concept that's going around a lot these days with in the food industry. Well, the scientists, the researchers, even psychologists, but also doctors. This term food addiction is showing up more and more in the media and in the research. And it's like, for me, food addiction, I don't know, it's just never made a lot of sense. I guess there's a stigma around that word addiction and addict that has this connotation of some illegal drug. And of course, when I think of addiction, it's heroin or something. And it usually results, in my mind anyway, a great possibility of an overdose and years and years in prison for crimes committed to pay for the habit, those kinds of things. That's what's in my mind with addiction and that. And yet these scientists and researchers and doctors are pointing out that this obesity epidemic, they're calling it an epidemic, 70% of North Americans are overweight or obese. And it's like, oh, that's not so good for our health, is it? Mm-hmm. So what's driving that? And so they've made this connection between these high calorie, highly processed, what they're calling ultra palatable foods. It's these foods that have high calorie content and not so much nutritional value. And what that does, these what we call junk foods, is it stimulates the same part of the brain that's stimulated when you're shooting up heroin or cocaine or sex. And what's interesting to understand is that this pleasure center that can so drive us off course has been a very essential part of our evolution for the species to survive. Because it's how we, in the caveman days, would distinguish between, should I eat a piece of fruit that's got a higher calorie content than the leaves on the fruit tree? And so it was a real guidance system to make sure we got enough calories through the carbohydrates, the fats, salt, the things that our bodies need to survive. In the caveman days, all these foods were in their whole food form. They were hard to harvest and get to. So the development of a dopamine cycle, this little pleasure hit that we would get as a reward for, oh yeah, let's go for the higher calories instead of the lower calories, those people evolved, and they passed on that development in their genes. So what's happened today, of course, is that our food environment has changed much faster than our dopamine environment. And so it's so easy to get that hit of dopamine. And these scientists and researchers, they look at brain imaging. And when somebody eats a potato chip or a French fry or a piece of rich chocolate, the same part of their brain lights up as when somebody's done cocaine or heroin or sex. It's like, oh, so they're making this connection to how it is that some people have developed a habit, which is what an addiction is, but an addiction seems to be a habit that has detrimental effects that causes harm, because habits are good. I've got a lot of good habits. But addiction is the term we kind of use for a habit that's not so good for us. So go ahead.
And what fuels the addiction most is foods that are high in fat, sugar, and salt. And those are the highly processed foods that we are so used to eating because we can buy them, eat them right away. They're quick, no preparation required, or we order a pizza, same story. High fat, high salt, high sugar foods are what really trigger this dopamine pathway.
Yeah, it's been called the pleasure trap because once you get on it, we're designed to go for that pleasure, and we get in the trap of overeating these things. Because like Connie says, all I have to do is open the box or peel back a wrapper, and it's right there. And interestingly, too, I mean, the food industry, I think it was back in the 70s or 80s, they started hiring these scientists to put together combinations of salt, oil, and sugar in a food to create what they called the bliss point that would most highly stimulate that dopamine receptor. So they, from a profit motive, from a corporate standpoint, it's like, let's get this to work for us. And it's really working.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it has this downside as well. So what I experienced the other night was that, we've been whole food, plant-based. Now we're SOS free, so we avoid the sugar, oil, and salt that is in these hyper palatable junk foods that stimulate that pleasure center so aggressively. And so when I have like one of our desserts, I made a black bean chocolate brownie the other night, and it's good. It's sweet and it's all whole foods. I mean, there's no sugar, no refined sugar. It's sweetened with dates. There's no flour even. It's, the beans provide that substance, that carbohydrate. There's no oil at all. There's a banana in there to give it kind of added moisture like oil adds to baked goods. So it's a very clean dessert. And so when I have a black bean brownie, I'm like treating myself and feeding myself well. So I have no qualms about that. But I noticed the other night after dinner, I wasn't really hungry anymore. But I had this idea. It might have come in the shower that morning. Anyway, earlier in the day, I had this idea. I remembered we got the black bean brownies, and I had made some nice cream. Now, an ice cream, we make like an ice cream out of frozen bananas, frozen fruit. I even add a little frozen date paste or a little frozen sweet potato puree. So anyway, I've got this whole food ice cream that I make. And so I had this thought earlier in the day, what if I put one of those brownies in the toaster oven, heat it up, and put some of that nice cream on top of it? What am I thinking? I mean, reflecting on it, I'm going back to sixth grade, Baskin Robbins. Let's get that hot fudge sundae with the brownie. It's like these memories stick around when that pleasure's been there. So anyway, I didn't see that coming until later. So after dinner, I did this, and I ate it, and I totally enjoyed it. But then I realized that what was driving that wasn't really listening to my body. It was listening to how can I hit that pleasure center a little bit. So that's just in full transparency. I just wanted to bring this up today because being whole food, plant-based, and SOS free, I mean, we're talking one of the cleanest ways to eat on the planet, probably way over on the spectrum to what's commonly done. And yet I can still use it to kind of stimulate that pleasure center. And if I'm doing it that way, I'm probably not nourishing my body in the very best way. So what is it that stimulates that pleasure center with whole food plant-based dessert like a black bean brownie or an ice cream? Is that it has a higher caloric content than most whole food plant-based meals. Like the black bean brownie, it has a lot more dates in it than I would sit down and eat at a meal. And the ice cream, it's all fruit, and so again, that, calories per pound, the nice cream, the black bean brownie, it's 2, 3, 4 times the calories per pound that we would get in one of our usual meals. So it was just so interesting to see that even being whole food, plant-based, SOS free, I can still override the intelligence of my body and go for, wow, what would light up that pleasure center? And, long term, it wouldn't be a good idea. But it was quite an eye opener to see, as clean as we eat, I could still kind of create a disproportionate amount of calories to the meal that I was eating.
And when we follow those memories, rather than listening to that deep intelligence of the body in the moment, would you consider that possibly an addictive action?
Yeah, so where's it's a fine line, isn't it? What's an addiction and what isn't? Because it's clearly a habit. But is it causing harm? That one little thing at night, I'm having trouble seeing that it's causing harm. But I guess the main point of this, I'm glad you bring this up, the main point of this isn't trying to figure out a formula for what to eat and what not to eat to really provide our bodies with what they need to thrive. What this is about is listening to the intelligence of the body. And that whole chocolate brownie and ice cream thing was totally listening up here. And so, our coaching around people with food and our coaching around people with relationship issues or jobs or anxiety or depression or anything, they both are addressing any of those issues. We have found that the reliable source to avoid the suffering that comes from eating a poor diet, becoming obese, and having chronic conditions, and the unnecessary suffering that comes from trying to work out something in a relationship when we're all emotional and that snow globe is so shaken up. We're so in our heads instead of being in the common sense of our bodies. What our coaching is around supporting people to learn how to come back to that inner wisdom, that inner resource we all have of intelligence and wisdom and common sense, that if we follow that with our food plan, with our relationships, with our jobs, with our coworkers, with our kids, if we don't respond to the mental agitation and feed me of the pleasure center, we avoid a lot of unnecessary suffering.
Very true. Yeah. It's listening to the wisdom within. And around food, we could call it listening to the body's wisdom. But we have this source of wisdom that can guide our lives to thrive on every level. And we are accessing it all the time. We just are not always aware that we're accessing it or aware that it is so present and so guiding us to thrive in all levels of life.
Yeah, I guess that's where we break the addiction, is when we drop out of our heads and into our bodies. And it's just not even an issue anymore. I think about my smoking habit. I smoked for like 5 years or so. And when I wanted to quit, I tried a couple of times quitting, but I kept, I want a cigarette. This is when I have a cigarette. And I would go through all that. But then there was a point at which I went, I'm just not going to do this anymore, I don't feel good when I smoke. And I had all these reasons, and I dropped out of my head. I stopped listening to that little urge that came up. Oh, this is when we smoke. Or a social situation. I loved it. It was an icebreaker. Oh, you got a match? Or you want a cigarette? It was crazy. But that's how I used it. It was part of my life, but it was all up here. It was never here. And so when I stopped, what I can see is I dropped out of here and listening to, wouldn't it be nice to have an icebreaker and offer them a cigarette? It's just like, nah, that isn't a balanced trade anymore. It's like, I ain't smoking. And from there, listening here, that takes the battle out.
So the recipe we got from the farmer, radishes that were so beautiful the first of the year, And we decided to make a bow tie pasta with a white mac and cheese sauce with asparagus, peas, onion, and pickled radishes on top. It's really delicious. It takes a little time, but it's worth it in the end. So enjoy.
Yeah, it's kind of a surprise having that pickled radish as a garnish, and it really makes the dish.
It does.
It's really an interesting dish. So thanks for joining us, and we'll be back next week.
Bye.